I sold my assets to pay for my wife's medical degree. When she graduated, she dumped me. You're broke and I'm a doctor. You disgust me. I need someone on my level. I just smiled and said, fine. During the divorce hearing, I handed over a video as evidence. When the judge saw it, he burst out laughing. She fainted. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Melvin, and I'm 58 years old. For 8 years, I believed I was investing in our future together. Instead, I was funding my own destruction. The morning of Sarah's medical school graduation should have been the happiest day of our 15-year marriage. I woke up at 5:30, my stomach churning with excitement and pride. After 8 grueling years of sacrifice, my wife was finally going to be Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I had sold everything we owned to make this dream possible. Our house, my late mother's jewelry, even my vintage motorcycle collection that I'd spent decades building. I pressed my only decent suit, the navy blue one I'd worn to every important event for the past 5 years. The fabric was wearing thin at the elbows, but it was all I could afford. Every spare dollar had gone towards Sarah's tuition, books, and living expenses. $23,000 per semester, $46,000 per year for 8 long years, $368,000 total. I know because I kept every receipt, every loan document, every bank statement. Sarah emerged from our tiny bathroom looking radiant. Her graduation cap sat perfectly on her freshly styled blonde hair, and her black gown flowed elegantly around her slim figure. She had always been beautiful, but that morning she seemed to glow with accomplishment and possibility. "You look incredible," I told her, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." She glanced at me briefly, her blue eyes unreadable. "Thank you." Something in her tone felt off, but I dismissed it. Graduation nerves, I thought. After all those years of stress and studying, anyone would feel overwhelmed. The ceremony was held in the university's grand auditorium. I sat in the family section, surrounded by other proud spouses and parents. Everyone around me was dressed in expensive clothes, designer watches glinting on their wrists, discussing vacation plans to Europe and new luxury cars. I tugged at my worn suit jacket, suddenly conscious of how out of place I looked. When they called Sarah's name, I stood up and cheered louder than anyone else. "That's my wife," I shouted, not caring who heard me. She had earned this moment, and I had been there every step of the way. Working double shifts at the auto repair shop, picking up weekend jobs, eating ramen noodles while she dined on takeout from expensive restaurants with her study groups. After the ceremony, families gathered outside for photos and celebrations. Watched Sarah pose with her classmates, all of them laughing and embracing. She looked so happy, so alive. When she finally made her way over to me, I pulled out the small camera I'd borrowed from my neighbor. "Let me get a picture of you with your diploma," I said, beaming with pride. Sarah held up her diploma, but her smile seemed forced. "There," she said quickly. "Got it." "Wait, let me take a few more. This is such an important moment." "Melvin, that's enough." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the celebratory atmosphere around us. I lowered the camera, confused by her sudden coldness. "Sarah, what's wrong? You should be celebrating. We did it. You're finally a doctor." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression shifting from forced pleasantness to something I'd never seen before. Disgust. "We," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We didn't do anything, Melvin. I did this. I earned this degree. I studied for 8 years while you— What did you do? You fixed cars, you changed oil, you emptied your pathetic savings account." The words hit me like physical blows. Around us, other families continued their joyful celebrations, but our little corner of the courtyard had become a bubble of devastating silence. "Sarah, I don't understand. We're a team. We've always been a team." She laughed, but it was cold and bitter. "A team? Look at yourself, Melvin. Really look. You're wearing a suit that's older than some of my classmates. Your hands are permanently stained with grease. You smell like motor oil even after you shower." My face burned with shame and confusion. "I worked hard to support us. To support your dream." "My dream, exactly. Not our dream, mine." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a cruel whisper. I'm a doctor now, Melvin. Do you understand what that means? I'll be making six figures within 2 years. I'll be respected, admired, and you'll still be crawling under broken-down cars in that filthy garage. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a world that had suddenly turned upside down. But we're married. We love each other. Love? Sarah's perfect eyebrows arched in mock surprise. Melvin, I need someone on my level, someone who can match my success, my education, my social status. You disgust me. The thought of introducing you to my colleagues as my husband makes me physically sick. Tears stung my eyes, but I fought them back. Sarah, please. We can work through this. I can go back to school, improve myself, whatever you need. She shook her head, her expression never softening. It's too late for that. You're 58 years old, Melvin. You are what you are, a mechanic, a nobody. And I refuse to let your mediocrity drag down my success. The diploma in her hands seemed to mock me. That piece of paper represented everything I had sacrificed, everything I had given up, and now she was using it as a weapon against me. I want a divorce, she continued, her voice as cold as winter steel. I've already spoken to a lawyer. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stood there in my threadbare suit, surrounded by the sounds of celebration, feeling like my entire world was collapsing. 8 years of love, sacrifice, and partnership meant nothing to her. I had been nothing more than a stepping stone. Fine, I heard myself say, though my voice sounded foreign to my own ears. Sarah looked surprised by my calm response. She had probably expected me to beg, to plead, to make a scene. But I had learned long ago that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. That evening, I sat alone in our small apartment, the place we'd moved to after selling our house to pay for her final year of medical school. Sarah had left immediately after our conversation, not even bothering to pack her things. She was probably celebrating with her new friends, the ones who matched her social status. I looked around at the sparse furniture, the empty walls, the complete absence of anything that spoke to 8 years of marriage. Even then, even in my devastation, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about her reaction had been too rehearsed, too perfect. But I had no idea how perfect her performance really was, or how long she had been planning this moment. The divorce papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a courier who looked embarrassed to be there. I signed for them with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, though whether from rage or heartbreak, I couldn't tell. Sarah was asking for everything. Half of what little remained of our assets, alimony payments of $2,500 per month, and, most infuriating of all, retroactive compensation for emotional distress caused by what her lawyer termed my financial control and manipulation during her educational period. I read that phrase over and over, my blood pressure rising with each repetition. Financial control. I had given her everything. I had bankrupted myself to fund her dreams, and now she was painting me as some sort of financial abuser. I couldn't afford a decent lawyer. The best I could manage was Robert Chen, a public defender who worked divorce cases on the side for $300. He met me in a coffee shop near the courthouse, his tired eyes scanning the papers Sarah's high-priced attorney had filed. "This is bad, Melvin," he said, not bothering to sugarcoat the situation. "She's represented by Madison, Cross, and Associates. They don't come cheap. Someone's funding this legal assault." "What do you mean someone's funding it?" Robert set down the papers and looked at me seriously. "Their retainer alone is probably $15,000. Your wife, ex-wife, just graduated medical school. She doesn't have that kind of money yet. Someone else is paying for this." The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. She's already with someone else. That would be my guess, and whoever it is has deep pockets and wants to make sure Sarah gets a clean break from you. I spent that night lying awake in our empty apartment, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand how my life had imploded so completely. 15 years of marriage, 8 years of sacrifice, and Sarah had moved on before the ink was even dry on her diploma. The next morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work and drove to Sarah's new medical practice. She had landed a residency position at Central Metropolitan Hospital, one of the most prestigious programs in the state. The building was gleaming glass and steel, a monument to success and achievement. I waited in the parking garage for 2 hours before I saw her. She emerged from the elevator wearing designer scrubs that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail. She looked confident, radiant, completely transformed from the struggling student I'd supported for nearly a decade. But she wasn't alone. A tall man in an expensive suit walked beside her, his hand possessively placed on the small of her back. He was probably 45, with salt and pepper hair and the kind of confident posture that came from never having worried about money. They were laughing together, sharing some private joke, completely absorbed in each other. When they reached a black Mercedes-Benz, a car worth more than everything I'd ever owned combined, the man pulled Sarah close and kissed her deeply. Not the quick peck of a new relationship, but the comfortable, familiar kiss of lovers who had been together for some time. I watched from my rusted pickup truck as Sarah melted into his embrace, her hands running through his perfectly styled hair. This wasn't a rebound relationship. This was something that had been going on for much longer than the 3 days since our divorce conversation. The man opened the passenger door for her with the practiced courtesy of someone who had been doing it for months, maybe years. As Sarah settled into the leather seat, I caught a glimpse of her face. She was looking at him with an expression I hadn't seen since our early dating days. Pure adoration mixed with something else. Relief. Relief that she was finally free of me. They drove away without ever knowing I was there, leaving me sitting in the parking garage with the crushing realization that my marriage had ended long before Sarah's graduation day. I had just been too blind, too trusting, too pathetically grateful for her presence in my life to see it. That evening, I called Robert Chen. "I need you to hire a private investigator," I told him. "Melvin, I have to be honest with you. PI services are expensive, and based on your financial situation, I'll find the money. I need to know how long this has been going on. Even if we prove adultery, it might not change much in terms of the settlement. The court doesn't really. It's not about the money anymore, Robert. I need to know the truth." 3 days later, I met with Jennifer Walsh, a private investigator who specialized in marital infidelity. She was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who had seen enough cheating spouses to develop a permanently skeptical expression. "How long do you think this affair has been going on?" she asked, reviewing the photos I'd taken in the parking garage. "I don't know. Maybe a few months." Jennifer studied the images more carefully, zooming in on Sarah's body language, the man's comfortable familiarity. "Based on what I'm seeing here, I'd guess much longer. Look at how naturally they move together. This isn't the awkward dance of a new relationship. They're comfortable, established." "How long are we talking?" "At least a year, possibly 2 or more." The words hit me like a sledgehammer. 2 years. Sarah had been cheating on me for 2 years while I worked overtime to pay for her final semesters, while I sold my mother's wedding ring to cover her textbook costs, while I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could afford to join her study groups at expensive restaurants. "Can you find out who he is?" "Already working on it. The Mercedes is registered to Dr. Marcus Whitfield. He's a cardiovascular surgeon at the same hospital where your wife is doing her residency. Divorced, no kids, worth approximately $3.2 million. I felt sick. Sarah hadn't just found a replacement for me, she had found my complete opposite. Where I fixed cars, he performed heart surgery. Where I struggled to pay bills, he owned multiple investment properties. Where I offered her 8 years of sacrifice and devotion, he offered her the lifestyle she'd always believed she deserved. "There's something else," Jennifer continued. "Dr. Whitfield's divorce was finalized 18 months ago. His ex-wife cited adultery in the filing. So he's done this before. It appears so, and based on the timeline, your wife Sarah was likely involved in the end of his previous marriage." The pieces were falling into place, creating a picture so ugly I could barely stand to look at it. Sarah hadn't just betrayed me. She had participated in destroying someone else's family. She was the other woman who had helped break up a marriage, and now she was leaving me for the same man. I want to know everything, I told Jennifer. Where they go, what they do, how long this has been happening. I want documentation of everything. That's going to cost you. I'll pay whatever it takes. I left Jennifer's office feeling like I was walking through a nightmare. The woman I had loved for 15 years, the woman I had sacrificed everything to support, was not just unfaithful. She was calculating and cruel beyond anything I had imagined. But I still had no idea just how calculating she really was. 2 weeks into Jennifer's investigation, I found myself doing something I'd never imagined, becoming a detective in my own life. The woman I had trusted completely had turned into a stranger, and every day brought new revelations about just how thoroughly she had deceived me. I was sitting in our empty apartment, surrounded by boxes of Sarah's belongings that she still hadn't collected, when I remembered the security camera. 6 months earlier, our neighborhood had experienced a string of break-ins. Mrs. Patterson next door had her television stolen, and the Johnsons across the street lost their entire jewelry collection. Sarah had been terrified, especially since she often stayed late at the hospital for her clinical rotations. She begged me to install a security system. I can't afford a full system, I had told her, looking at our dwindling bank account. But I can set up a basic camera in the living room. At least we'll have some record if anyone breaks in. I had bought a simple wireless camera from an electronics store, the kind that recorded to a cloud storage account. It wasn't fancy, but it covered most of our main living area and the entrance to our bedroom. Sarah had been so grateful, kissing me and telling me how safe it made her feel. Now, sitting in the aftermath of our destroyed marriage, I realized I had never actually checked those recordings. The camera had been running continuously for 6 months, faithfully uploading footage to an account I had set up and then forgotten about. My hands trembled as I logged into the cloud storage system. Months of recordings were there, organized by date and time. I scrolled back through the timeline, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and anticipation. What would I find? How long had Sarah been lying to me? I started with recordings from 3 weeks ago, the week before her graduation. Nothing unusual. Sarah coming home from the hospital, eating dinner alone while I worked late shifts, studying at our kitchen table. She looked tired but focused, the dedicated medical student I thought I knew. I moved back further. 1 month ago, 2 months ago, still nothing that seemed out of place. Then I reached the recordings from 3 months ago, and my world shattered all over again. There was Sarah, letting herself into our apartment at 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. But she wasn't alone. Dr. Marcus Whitfield followed her through the door, his hands already reaching for her, pulling her into a passionate embrace right there in our living room. I watched in sick fascination as my wife of 15 years kissed another man in the home I had paid for, on the furniture I had bought with money earned from fixing cars and working weekend shifts. They moved together with the familiarity of lovers who had done this many times before. "Finally," Sarah whispered, her voice clearly audible through the camera's microphone. "I've been waiting all week for this." Marcus pulled her close, his hands tangled in her hair. "I know, baby. Me too. When can we stop sneaking around like this?" "Soon," Sarah replied, leading him toward our bedroom. "After graduation, I can finally end this charade with Melvin." Charade. She called our marriage a charade. I fast-forwarded through the next hour, unable to watch what happened in our bedroom, but seeing them emerge later, disheveled and satisfied. They sat on our couch, the same couch where Sarah and I had watched movies together, where we'd planned our future, where I'd held her while she cried about failed exams. "I can't wait until this is over," Sarah said, curling up against Marcus's chest. "Living with him is becoming unbearable. He's so grateful for everything, so pathetically devoted. It makes me sick." Marcus laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "You've done an amazing job, though. 8 years of playing the devoted wife while he funded your entire education. That's some serious long-term planning." "It wasn't easy," Sarah replied. "Do you know how hard it is to pretend to love someone who disgusts you, to smile and say thank you every time he hands over another tuition payment?" My vision blurred with rage and heartbreak. 8 years. She had been pretending for 8 years. "What are you going to tell him?" Marcus asked. "The truth, but not the whole truth," Sarah said with a cruel smile. "I'll tell him I need someone on my level, someone successful. I'll make it sound like I've outgrown him. He's so insecure about his education and social status that he'll believe it completely. And if he fights the divorce, he won't. Melvin's not a fighter, he's a people pleaser. He'll just accept it and move on. Besides, by the time this is over, he'll be so broken that he won't have the energy to fight anything." I paused the video, my entire body shaking with fury. They were discussing my destruction like it was a business plan, calculating every detail of how to hurt me most efficiently. But I forced myself to keep watching. I needed to see everything. "Have you thought about what you're going to do with the house?" Marcus asked. "What house?" "We sold it 2 years ago to pay for my tuition." "Right, I forgot. Good thing, too. It would have complicated the divorce." Sarah laughed. "Melvin doesn't even know how perfectly this worked out. By the time I'm done with him, he'll have nothing left to fight for. No house, no savings, no assets, just his pathetic little apartment and his mechanic job." "You're brilliant," Marcus said, kissing her forehead. "Cold, but brilliant." "I learned from watching his ex-wife take you for everything you were worth," Sarah replied. "I'm not making that mistake. When I leave Melvin, I'm taking whatever little he has left, and I'm making sure he can't come after me for anything." I scrolled back further through the recordings, my horror growing with each discovery. The affair had been going on for over 2 years. 2 years of Sarah bringing Marcus into our home while I worked double shifts to pay her tuition. 2 years of them laughing at my expense, planning my downfall, treating me like a fool who deserved to be used and discarded. In one recording from 18 months ago, I watched Sarah and Marcus making love on our kitchen table while discussing how to manipulate me into selling my mother's jewelry. Sarah had come home that night and cried about how stressed she was about upcoming exams, how she needed new textbooks and equipment. I had held her and promised to find the money somehow, never knowing that her tears were fake and her stress was manufactured. In another recording from 8 months ago, Sarah was on the phone with someone, probably a lawyer, discussing divorce strategy while Marcus massaged her shoulders. "I need to make sure I can prove emotional distress," she was saying. "Maybe financial abuse. He controls all the money, decides what we can and can't afford. I can spin that as manipulation." Financial abuse. I had controlled the money because there wasn't any money. Every dollar had gone to her education, her dreams, her future, and now she was planning to use my poverty, the poverty caused by supporting her, as evidence against me in court. The most devastating recording was from just 6 weeks ago. Sarah was getting dressed after spending the afternoon with Marcus, and she was on the phone with someone else. "No, don't worry about it," she was saying. "Melvin has no idea what's coming. He's so trusting, so naive. He actually thinks I'm grateful for all his sacrifices. He has no clue that I've been planning this exit strategy for years." She paused to listen to whoever was on the other end. "Trust me, by the time I'm finished with him, he'll be lucky if he can afford rent on a studio apartment. And the best part is he'll blame himself. He'll think he wasn't good enough, wasn't successful enough. He'll never figure out that this was always the plan." I sat in the darkness of our apartment, the glow from my laptop screen illuminating the boxes of Sarah's belongings, and I understood something that changed everything. This wasn't just about an affair. This wasn't even just about using me for money. This was about complete and total destruction. Sarah hadn't just planned to leave me. She had planned to destroy me so thoroughly that I would never recover. She wanted to take everything I had, everything I was, and grind it into dust. But she had made one crucial mistake. In all her careful planning, in all her calculated cruelty, she had forgotten about the camera. The camera I had installed to make her feel safe had recorded every moment of her betrayal, and now I had it all. The security camera footage was damning enough to destroy Sarah's divorce case, but something nagged at me as I reviewed the recordings. In several videos, I had watched Sarah on phone calls that seemed too sophisticated, too calculated for simple adultery and divorce planning. She spoke with the confidence of someone who had done this before, someone with experience in deception. I called Jennifer Walsh the next morning. "I need you to dig deeper into Sarah's background," I told her. "Before we met, I think there might be things I never knew about her." "What kind of things?" "I don't know yet, but she's too good at this, too experienced. This level of manipulation doesn't develop overnight." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "That's going to cost extra. Background investigations, especially going back 15 years, require a lot of resources." "Do it. I'll pay whatever it costs." 3 days later, Jennifer called me with news that made my blood run cold. "Melvin, you need to sit down for this. Sarah's real name isn't Sarah Mitchell. It's Sandra Michelle Torres, and she has a criminal history in 3 different states." I felt the room spinning around me. "What do you mean, her real name isn't Sarah?" "She legally changed it 12 years ago, right around the time she moved to our state. Before that, she was Sandra Torres, and she was wanted for identity theft and credit card fraud in California." "Identity theft?" "She assumed the identity of a woman named Sarah Mitchell who died in a car accident. Used her social security number, her credit history, everything. The original Sarah Mitchell had excellent credit and no debts, perfect for someone starting a new life." My mind raced back to when I'd first met Sarah. We'd been at a community college continuing education class. She was taking prerequisites for medical school. I was learning about automotive electronics. She'd seemed so innocent, so dedicated to her dreams of becoming a doctor. She'd told me she was starting over after a bad relationship, that she wanted to build something meaningful with the right person. All lies. "There's more," Jennifer continued. "I found records of 2 previous marriages. Both ended in messy divorces where she took substantial assets from older men who had supported her through various educational programs." Educational programs? "First husband funded her undergraduate degree in business. Marriage lasted 6 years. Divorce was finalized right after graduation, and she took half his construction company. Second husband paid for her to get certified as a medical technician. That marriage lasted 4 years, ended as soon as she got her certification. She cleaned out his savings account before filing for divorce." I felt sick. Sandra, had a pattern. She found decent, hard-working men who were willing to invest in her future, then systematically destroyed them once she got what she needed. "Am I just the latest victim?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It appears so. But here's the thing, Melvin. She got greedy with you. Medical school is expensive, and 8 years is a long time to maintain a fake identity in marriage. She's left a much bigger trail this time." Over the next week, Jennifer and I pieced together the full scope of Sarah's criminal activities. It was worse than simple identity theft and marriage. Fraud. Much worse. Sarah had been using my name and credit information to obtain loans and credit cards without my knowledge. Over the past 3 years, she had opened 17 different credit accounts using my social security number and forged signatures. The total debt was over $93,000. "How is this possible?" I asked Robert Chen when we met to review Jennifer's findings. "Wouldn't I have seen these on my credit report?" "She's sophisticated," Robert replied, spreading the documentation across his desk. "Look at the addresses on these applications. They're all post office boxes or addresses where she could intercept the mail. She's been managing your credit profile, making minimum payments to keep everything current so you'd never see any red flags." "But why? She was taking money directly from our joint account for tuition. Why did she need additional credit?" Jennifer pulled out another stack of papers. "Because medical school tuition was just part of it. Look at these credit card statements. Luxury vacations to Europe, charged to cards in your name, designer clothes, expensive jewelry, a lease on that Mercedes she's been driving. She's been living a double life funded entirely by credit fraud." I stared at the evidence in disbelief. The Mercedes I'd seen her driving with Marcus wasn't his. It was leased under my name with my credit. The designer clothes, the expensive dinners, the lavish lifestyle she'd been living with her lover, I had been paying for all of it without even knowing it. "There's something else," Jennifer said, her voice grim. "The life insurance policy." "What life insurance policy?" Robert pulled out another document. Sarah took out a $500,000 life insurance policy on you 18 months ago. You're listed as the primary insured. She's the beneficiary. My hands went numb. I never signed anything like that. Your signature is on the application, Jennifer said. But based on the handwriting analysis I had done, it's forged. She's been practicing your signature for years. Look at these examples. She showed me pages of documents where my signature had been forged. Loan applications, credit card agreements, the life insurance policy. Sarah had been methodically stealing my identity for years, building toward something much bigger than a simple divorce. You think she was planning to kill me? I think she was planning for you to die, Robert said carefully. Maybe suicide, maybe an accident. But with the level of debt she's accumulated in your name, plus the emotional devastation of the divorce, it wouldn't be hard to make your death look like the result of depression and financial stress. The room felt like it was closing in on me. Sarah hadn't just been planning to leave me, she had been planning my death. The life insurance policy, the crushing debt, the systematic destruction of my credit and savings. She was setting up a scenario where my death would solve all her problems and make her wealthy. We need to go to the police, I said. We will, Robert replied, but first we need to document everything. Jennifer, I want you to compile every piece of evidence we have. Credit fraud, identity theft, forgery, insurance fraud. We're going to bury her. What about the divorce proceedings? I asked. Robert smiled for the first time since I'd met him. Oh, that's going to be very interesting. Sarah's lawyer thinks they're dealing with a simple case of a wife outgrowing her blue-collar husband. They have no idea they're representing someone who's committed multiple felonies against her own spouse. Over the next 2 weeks, we built an airtight case against Sarah. Jennifer traced her activities back years, documenting every forged signature, every fraudulent account, every crime she'd committed using my identity. We found evidence of tax fraud, mail fraud, and conspiracy. The financial crimes alone carried a potential sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. But I wanted to see her face when she realized her perfect plan had fallen apart. I wanted her to understand that the man she thought was too stupid and trusting to fight back had outsmarted her completely. The court date for our divorce hearing was set for the following Thursday. Sarah's lawyer had filed additional motions demanding immediate alimony payments and requesting that I be held in contempt for hiding assets. Assets that didn't exist because Sarah had stolen them through credit fraud. She was so confident in her strategy that she'd never considered the possibility that I might discover the truth. In her mind, I was still the naive mechanic who would accept whatever story she fed me. She had no idea that I'd been recording our conversations since discovering the camera footage. She didn't know that I'd documented every forged signature and fraudulent account. She couldn't imagine that her perfect victim had turned into her worst nightmare. But she was about to find out. The morning of our divorce hearing, I woke up at 5:30 with a strange sense of calm. For the first time in months, I wasn't the victim anymore. I was walking into that courtroom with enough evidence to send Sarah to prison for decades. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the same threadbare navy one I'd worn to her graduation, but this time it felt like armor. In my briefcase, I carried copies of every document Jennifer had uncovered, every forged signature, every fraudulent account. Most importantly, I carried a USB drive containing the security camera footage that would destroy Sarah's carefully constructed lies. Robert Chen met me outside the courthouse steps. Despite his usual pessimistic demeanor, he seemed energized, almost excited. "Are you ready for this?" he asked. "I've been ready for months." "Remember, let me do most of the talking. We want to spring this evidence at exactly the right moment. Sarah's lawyer is going to present their case first, painting you as a controlling, financially abusive husband. Let them dig their own grave." We walked into the courtroom together. It was smaller than I'd expected, with just a few rows of wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that made everything look harsh and institutional. Sarah was already there, sitting at a table with her high-priced attorney, Margaret Cross. She looked stunning in a tailored black suit that probably cost more than I made in a month, her blonde hair pulled back in a sophisticated bun. She appeared confident, composed, every inch the successful doctor who had outgrown her blue-collar husband. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she gave me a small, pitying smile that made my blood boil. Even now, even in the middle of destroying my life, she thought I was too pathetic to be a real threat. Dr. Marcus Whitfield sat in the gallery behind Sarah, offering her silent support. He wore an expensive charcoal suit and gold watch, radiating the kind of success and sophistication that Sarah had always craved. Looking at them together, I could see why she thought she'd won. They were the perfect power couple, and I was just the obstacle that needed to be cleared away. Judge Patricia Morrison entered the courtroom, and we all stood. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. Robert had told me she was known for her no-nonsense approach to divorce cases and her particular hatred of fraud and deception. "Please be seated," Judge Morrison said, settling behind her bench. "This is the matter of Mitchell versus Mitchell. Are both parties ready to proceed?" Margaret Cross stood up first. "Your Honor, we are ready to present our case on behalf of Dr. Sarah Mitchell." The title stung, but I kept my expression neutral. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the woman who had stolen her name from a dead person and was now stealing my life. "Your Honor," Margaret began, "my client is a newly graduated physician who has endured 8 years of financial control and emotional manipulation at the hands of her husband. Despite earning her medical degree through her own hard work and determination, Mr. Mitchell has systematically isolated her from financial independence and social advancement." I watched Sarah nod sadly at appropriate moments, playing the role of the abused wife perfectly. She dabbed at her eyes with a tissue when Margaret described how I had forced her to live in poverty while pursuing her education and restricted her access to social opportunities that would have advanced her career. Dr. Mitchell requests immediate spousal support of $2,500 per month, retroactive compensation for financial hardship during her educational period, and 50% of all marital assets, Margaret continued. She also requests that the court recognize the emotional distress caused by Mr. Mitchell's controlling behavior. Judge Morrison listened without expression, occasionally making notes. When Margaret finished, she turned to Robert. "Mr. Chen, how does your client respond to these allegations?" Robert stood up slowly, and I could see the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Your Honor, my client categorically denies all allegations of abuse, control, or manipulation. In fact, we have evidence that will show the court that Dr. Mitchell has been the victim of an elaborate fraud perpetrated by his wife over the course of several years." Sarah's confident expression flickered for just a moment. Margaret Cross frowned, clearly not expecting this direction. "Furthermore," Robert continued, "we have evidence that Mrs. Mitchell has committed multiple felonies, including identity theft, credit fraud, forgery, and conspiracy to commit insurance fraud. We request permission to present this evidence to the court." The courtroom went dead silent. Sarah's face had gone pale, and I saw her hand tremble as she reached for her water glass. Marcus leaned forward in his seat, his confident posture suddenly uncertain. Judge Morrison's eyebrows rose. "Those are serious allegations, Mr. Chen. I hope you have substantial evidence to support them." "We do, Your Honor. With the court's permission, I'd like to present our first piece of evidence." Robert walked to the evidence table and picked up a manila folder. "Your Honor, these are financial records showing that Mrs. Mitchell has opened 17 credit accounts using Mr. Mitchell's Social Security number and forged signatures. The total fraudulent debt exceeds $93,000. He handed copies to the judge and to Margaret Cross. Sarah's lawyer began flipping through the pages, her expression growing more alarmed with each document. "Your Honor," Margaret said, standing quickly, "we object to this line of questioning. These allegations have nothing to do with the dissolution of the marriage." "On the contrary," Robert replied, "they have everything to do with it. Mrs. Mitchell is requesting spousal support and asset division based on claims of financial hardship. These documents prove that she has been living a secret life of luxury funded by credit fraud committed against her own husband." Judge Morrison studied the documents carefully. "Mr. Chen, how did you obtain these records?" "Through a licensed private investigator, Your Honor. All evidence was obtained legally through public records and credit reporting agencies. Your Honor, Margaret interjected, without proper authentication, these documents are— I have authentication, Robert interrupted. Jennifer Walsh, the private investigator, is prepared to testify. We also have handwriting analysis confirming that all signatures on these documents are forgeries. Sarah was staring at the table now, her hands clenched in her lap. She finally understood that her perfect plan was collapsing around her. There's more, Your Honor, Robert said. We have evidence that Mrs. Mitchell has been using a stolen identity for over 12 years. Her real name is Sandra Michelle Torres, and she has a criminal history in multiple states. The courtroom erupted. Margaret Cross shot to her feet, demanding objections. Sarah made a small, choking sound and grabbed Marcus's hand. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Order! Mr. Chen, you will present this evidence methodically and properly, or I will hold you in contempt. Yes, Your Honor. Robert returned to our table and picked up the USB drive. Your Honor, I have video evidence that will clarify the true nature of this marriage and Mrs. Mitchell's intentions. Sarah's eyes went wide with horror. She knew about the security camera, but she'd forgotten it in her panic over the other evidence. Video evidence? Judge Morrison asked. Yes, Your Honor. Security camera footage from the couple's residence covering the past 6 months. This footage shows Mrs. Mitchell engaged in an extramarital affair and discussing her plans to defraud Mr. Mitchell. Your Honor, Margaret said desperately, this is a clear invasion of privacy. The camera was installed in the common areas of Mr. Mitchell's own residence with his wife's knowledge and consent, Robert replied smoothly. Mrs. Mitchell actually requested the security system. Judge Morrison considered this for a moment. I'll allow it. Bailiff, please set up the video equipment. As the court technician prepared to play the footage, I watched Sarah's face transform from confidence to panic to desperation. She leaned over to whisper frantically to Margaret, who looked like she was ready to run from the courtroom. The first video clip began playing on the courtroom's large monitor. There was Sarah, clear as day, letting Marcus into our apartment and falling into his arms. I've been waiting all week for this, her recorded voice said. The sound quality was perfect. Every word, every laugh, every cruel comment about me was crystal clear. I watched Judge Morrison's expression grow progressively darker as she listened to Sarah and Marcus discuss their plans for my destruction. When can we stop sneaking around like this? Marcus's voice filled the courtroom. After graduation, I can finally end this charade with Melvin, Sarah replied. Judge Morrison paused the video. Charade? Robert nodded grimly. Yes, Your Honor. As you'll see in the remaining footage, Mrs. Mitchell refers to her marriage as a charade multiple times. She discusses her plans to take everything from Mr. Mitchell and leave him with nothing. The judge resumed the video. We all listened as Sarah described me as pathetically devoted and expressed her disgust at having to pretend to love me. When the clip reached the part where Sarah and Marcus discussed my future poverty and emotional destruction, Judge Morrison's face was like stone. This is enough, she said, stopping the video. Mr. Chen, how much more of this do you have? Hours, Your Honor. 6 months of similar conversations detailing Mrs. Mitchell's fraud and her plans to destroy my client financially and emotionally. Judge Morrison turned to Margaret Cross. Counselor, does your client have anything to say about this evidence? Margaret looked like she wanted to disappear. She glanced at Sarah, who was now crying real tears for the first time in our entire relationship. Your Honor, we request a recess to consult with our client. Denied. Judge Morrison's voice was ice cold. Mrs. Mitchell, you will stand and address this court. Sarah stood on trembling legs, her perfect composure completely shattered. Mrs. Mitchell, or should I say Ms. Torres, Judge Morrison continued, you have committed perjury in my courtroom. You have filed fraudulent claims against your husband, and based on the evidence presented, you have committed multiple felonies. Sarah opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled sob came out. Judge Morrison looked at her with pure disgust. In 30 years on this bench, I have never seen such a calculated, malicious destruction of a marriage. You are a predator, Ms. Torres. You have systematically destroyed a man who gave you everything. The judge turned to me. Mr. Mitchell, I am dismissing all claims against you. Furthermore, I am ordering a full restitution investigation. You will receive compensation for every dollar stolen through fraudulent accounts. Sarah swayed on her feet and had to grab the table for support. Bailiff, Judge Morrison continued, please contact the district attorney's office. I want criminal charges filed immediately. At that moment, Sarah's legs gave out completely. She collapsed to the floor as Margaret Cross rushed to help her. The woman who had planned my destruction so carefully was now nothing more than a broken criminal facing decades in prison. Judge Morrison looked down at Sarah's crumpled form and shook her head. Court is adjourned. As the bailiff began making calls to the prosecutor's office, I sat in my chair, feeling lighter than I had in years. The woman who had called me disgusting and pathetic was now unconscious on the courtroom floor, and I was finally free. 6 months after the courtroom collapse that ended Sarah's reign of deception, I stood in the living room of my new house, watching the morning sun stream through windows that actually belonged to me. For the first time in 8 years, I owned something real, something that couldn't be taken away by lies or manipulation. The house wasn't large or fancy, but it was mine. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a small garage where I could work on cars again. I'd bought it with the restitution money from Sarah's criminal conviction, plus the settlement from the life insurance company that had been defrauded. After years of poverty and sacrifice, I finally had financial security. The criminal trial had been swift and decisive. Once the FBI began investigating Sarah's activities, they uncovered a pattern of fraud spanning over 15 years and multiple states. Sandra Michelle Torres, as she was now legally known again, had defrauded 7 different men out of a combined total of over $600,000. I wasn't her first victim, just her most profitable one. The day of her sentencing, I sat in the courthouse gallery and watched as the judge handed down 12 years in federal prison. Sarah had tried to plea bargain, offering to testify against Marcus Whitfield in exchange for a reduced sentence. But the prosecutor wasn't interested in deals. The evidence was too overwhelming, the crimes too calculated. When the bailiff led her away in handcuffs, Sarah turned to look at me one last time. Her blonde hair had grown out to show dark roots, and the expensive clothes had been replaced with an orange jumpsuit. The beautiful, sophisticated woman who had called me disgusting was now nothing more than federal prisoner number 47,832, where she mouthed the words, "I'm sorry," as they led her away, but I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no anger, no pity. She had become irrelevant to my life. Dr. Marcus Whitfield faced his own reckoning when investigators discovered that he had known about Sarah's real identity and criminal history. He was charged as an accessory to fraud. The medical board revoked his license and he lost his position at the hospital. His $3.2 million net worth evaporated in legal fees and civil settlements. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah had destroyed her previous marriage to be with a man she thought represented success and security, only to destroy him as well. Her greed had consumed everything she touched. But the real revelation came 3 weeks after Sarah's sentencing, when Jennifer Walsh called me with news that changed everything. "Melvin, you need to see this," she said, arriving at my house with a thick manila folder. "I kept digging into Sarah's background and I found something that's going to blow your mind." She spread photographs across my kitchen table. They showed a modest house in Sacramento, California, with a small garden and white picket fence. "This belonged to the real Sarah Mitchell," Jennifer said, "the woman whose identity Sarah stole." I studied the photos, confused about why this mattered now. "Sarah Mitchell wasn't just some random identity theft victim," Jennifer continued. "Look at this." She handed me a photograph of a young woman with blonde hair and a gentle smile standing next to a man in a mechanic's uniform. The real Sarah Mitchell was married to an auto mechanic named David Mitchell. He died in the same car accident that killed her 15 years ago. My blood ran cold. "You think Sarah chose that identity specifically?" "I think Sarah researches her victims very carefully. She knew you were a mechanic named Mitchell before she ever met you." The community college class where you first encountered her? She enrolled specifically to meet you. Jennifer pulled out more documents. Look at this. Sarah had been following your routine for months before your first meeting. She knew where you worked, where you lived, what time you took that continuing education class. The truth hit me like a physical blow. My entire relationship with Sarah had been a lie from the very first conversation. She hadn't fallen in love with me and then grown to despise me. She had targeted me from the beginning, chosen me like a predator selects prey. There's more, Jennifer said grimly. The real Sarah Mitchell inherited a substantial amount of money from her parents' estate, money that Sarah gained access to when she stole the identity. She's been living off that inheritance for years. How much money? $473,000, money that rightfully belonged to David Mitchell's surviving family members. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Sarah's deception. She hadn't just stolen my money and my identity. She had built her entire criminal enterprise on the grave of another couple, another mechanic whose life had been destroyed by tragedy. The good news is that the estate money is being recovered, Jennifer continued. David Mitchell had a sister who's been searching for those funds for years. She's going to get her inheritance back, thanks to your case exposing Sarah's crimes. 3 months later, I received an unexpected visitor. A woman in her 50s knocked on my door, introducing herself as Linda Mitchell, David's sister. I wanted to thank you, she said, sitting in my living room with tears in her eyes. For 15 years I've been fighting to find out what happened to David and Sarah's estate. The police said it was lost in bureaucratic errors, but I knew someone had stolen it. I'm sorry it took so long, I said. I wish I had figured out what Sarah was doing sooner. Don't apologize, Linda replied firmly. You stopped her. That monster used my brother's name to destroy other families, and you put an end to it. She handed me a small photo album. These are pictures of David and Sarah, the real ones. They were good people who deserved better. I flipped through the photos, seeing a young couple who looked genuinely happy together. David Mitchell had my build and coloring, the same calloused hands of a working man. Sarah Mitchell had Sarah's blonde hair and blue eyes, but her smile was warm and real. They would have liked you, Linda said. David always said that mechanics were the most honest people in the world because they fixed things instead of breaking them. After Linda left, I sat on my front porch and thought about the strange journey that had brought me to this moment. I had started as a victim, a naive man who thought love and sacrifice would be enough to build a life with someone. Sarah had nearly destroyed me, financially and emotionally, but in fighting back and refusing to accept her version of the truth, I had become something more. I had exposed a predator who had been destroying lives for over a decade. I had brought justice to families who had been searching for answers for years. Most importantly, I had learned that my worth wasn't determined by someone else's opinion of me. Sarah had called me disgusting, pathetic, a failure. But she was wrong. I was a survivor. 6 months later, I met Ellen at a classic car show. She was admiring a 1967 Mustang that I'd restored in my spare time, asking intelligent questions about the engine modifications. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital, drove a practical Honda Civic, and had never once asked me how much money I made. When I told her about Sarah and the trial, Ellen listened without judgment. She sounds like she was very sick, Ellen said. People don't hurt others like that unless something is fundamentally broken inside them. Do you think I was stupid for not seeing it sooner? Ellen shook her head. I think you were trusting. That's not the same thing. The world needs people who are willing to believe the best of others, even when they use that trust against us. Especially then, she said, taking my hand, because the alternative is becoming like her. A year later, Ellen and I were married in a small ceremony at the local community center. Nothing fancy, nothing expensive, just family and friends celebrating something real. Linda Mitchell came to the wedding, telling everyone who would listen about how I had helped bring justice to her brother's memory. As Ellen and I danced to our first song, I thought about the man I had been 3 years ago, broken, betrayed, convinced that I wasn't worthy of real love. Sarah had tried to destroy me, but instead she had forced me to discover my own strength. The woman who had called me pathetic was spending her days in a federal prison while I was dancing with my new wife in a room full of people who actually cared about me. The woman who had mocked my blue-collar life was wearing an orange jumpsuit, while I was building a business restoring classic cars for collectors who appreciated real craftsmanship. Sarah had been wrong about everything. I wasn't disgusting or worthless or pathetic. I was exactly what the world needed more of, someone who fixed broken things instead of breaking them. As the song ended and Ellen smiled up at me, I realized that Sarah had given me an unexpected gift. By trying to destroy me, she had forced me to rebuild myself into someone stronger, wiser, and infinitely happier than the man I had been before. The student had indeed become the teacher, but not in the way Sarah had planned. She had taught me that real worth doesn't come from degrees or social status or expensive cars. It comes from integrity, from treating people with kindness, from having the courage to fight back when someone tries to destroy you. And in the end, that lesson was worth more than any medical degree she could have stolen.